All right, let's get started, Bruce. Ready when you are? Okay, we're going to call the meeting to order. This is the Conservation Commission meeting. In case someone was looking for another, there's a couple of them going on. The first thing we're going to do is approve the minutes. Are there any additions or changes to the minutes? Mason.
Yeah, on the second page, on motion by Mason and second by Sue, the commission voted all in favor to issue a notice of intent. I believe it's issue an order.
Did you catch that, Alita? Second page, first paragraph, words halfway down.
It's actually the third page.
Or, no.
1, 2, 3. Oh, this one. Okay.
All right, is it also mentioned?
Okay.
No, it's a different motion.
Oh.
Yeah. Did you catch it? All right, I'll just mark it. Okay. Downey?
The last page, where it says Downey to make 6-inch breach at the top of the larger dam and slowly lowering the water before exposing the lodge. That should say before installing a flow-through device. It's the next to last sentence. So.
Where is it?
Very
Next to last sentence before Paul will speak with Ellie again, it says before exposing the lodge. It should say before installing a flow-through device.
Anything else? Okay. May I have a motion
Motion to accept the minutes of November 13th.
to amended, right? Okay. And any other comments about that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Let's see that. The first item on the agenda is notice of intent filed by Andrea Associates on behalf of the National Grid for demolition and removal of concrete pads, gravel and perimeter fence, and the restoration of the site. Work is proposed to take place in riverfront area, bordering land subject to flooding and 100-foot buffer zone of inland bank. The project location is the Florence No. 2 substation at the intersection of Nonotuck Street and Pine Street. And, hey, are you gonna?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if Andrew was here.
Yeah, Andrea is here.
Oh, okay, all right.
I can introduce these guys. My name's David Cameron. I'm a wetland scientist and wildlife biologist with AECOM. And I'm here with Andrea Associates in the back, who is the environmental engineer who works for National Grid USA and is the project manager for this project. And Ashley Belusa, who's also with AECOM and worked on helping assemble the notice of intent doing the field work through this project. We're here tonight just to present a fairly straightforward project. We think it's, in a nutshell, it's a proactive restoration project involving restoration of riverfront area and bordering land subject to flooding along the Mill River over at the Florence No. 2 substation on Pine Street. The project basically involves removal of chain link fence and removal of trap rock and some concrete pads that occupy roughly a little over a tenth of an acre at the site, about 5,200 square feet. It's really a very simple project. There's not a lot to say about it. I have some extra plans here. They're the same plans that the commission has. We've got some copies that if the public is interested, I can spread them out up on the table here. They've got a little bit more color in them and show the silt fence and the edge of the river and the buffer zone and stuff like that.
Could you just remind us what you're going to plant?
Yeah.
Once the concrete is out.
Once the concrete is out, the natural topography of the site is going to be restored using backfilling of topsoil and then seeding with a wildlife conservation mix, which is a mix comprised exclusively of herbaceous native wildflowers and grass species. Some other interesting points or important things to bring up. We had originally thought that the project site was in priority habitat and estimated habitat, and so we actually we sent an additional copy of the notice of intent to the Natural Heritage Program, and they sent back our check and said, you guys are right on the edge, but you're not in habitat. So apparently the habitat there is restricted right to the river itself. We got a file number, the comments from DEP. I suspect you guys got the same thing. They didn't have any comments. I think they concurred with our presentation of this as a resource improvement project under 310 CMR 10.53.
Okay.
That's basically it.
Oh, we did this one. Are there any comments or questions from members of the commission about this? All right. So is this going to just, this is a little bit peripheral, is this going to just be left as a field, or is it just going to be?
I think that's the plan.
Yeah, I can answer that. Currently, we're planning on just, as Steve said, seeding the area, and it'll be left as a vegetated property at this time. That's what the plans for.
And you're going to do this when?
Well, given the winter and weather conditions, we haven't scheduled crews for it yet, just because of other emergencies may arrive. But we'll enter early spring, and then obviously the seeding will occur in the spring with the growing season.
I've actually got the original certified mail cards and a copy as well as the self-addressed stamp envelope, the other conditions, and a photo that shows that we posted the sign about the public hearing at the site.
Copy of that electronically.
Okay.
That goes to Bruce.
Thanks.
Okay, so if there's no further comments from the commission, I have a motion to close the hearing. What's that?
Any comments from the public?
Oh, the public, excuse me. I'm assuming that you all came for a different reason. Maybe that's not a good assumption. Does anyone have any comments about the work to be done at the Florence substation?
How do you plan to manage succession with the wildflower mix?
I don't think there is any plan for management. It's just, this is simply a way to stabilize the soils that get temporarily disturbed from removing the concrete pads and the trap rock and then seeding it with a native species and just letting nature kind of.
And then maybe, vegetation, arise, woody vegetation, that'd be.
Presumably
good.
I would suspect that there are, in the seed bank, there are woody species. There's American elm. There's actually some ornamental conifers out there too, so it's conceivable that woody vegetation would eventually grow back.
And we have no plans for mowing the site or additional woody plantings, just vegetative seeding, and then what will occur naturally.
Great.
Okay. Okay. Motion to.
Move to close?
Sorry.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Okay. All right, so we should do the conditions. We have time. I suggest we just do 1 through 32, standard conditions. Any other? Okay.
Move general conditions 1 to 32.
Second, Leslie. Okay. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if you would like to sit down out there, you can either get some chairs and sit down out there, or there will be 3 vacated chairs in a moment. 4. Okay, Tom Downey, would you like to give us a review of? Thanks. Good to see you. Give us a review of what. We talked about Bear Street and Orange. We talked about CPC.
There's some violation issues to talk about too.
Violation issues. we'll discuss the North Avenue Tofino Associates issue at 6 o'clock.
We're required to stick to the schedule as published.
So Barrett Street Marsh, I installed a 40-foot, two 20-foot sections of 10-inch pipe. Breached the beaver dam on the side, or near the road, probably reducing the water level by about 5 inches. That's where the base of the pipe is. I have been by half a dozen times then to check to make sure it's flowing. It's still flowing. The beavers have not tried to plug it either at the outlet end. I put a cage around the inlet end and it seems to be staying ice-free. So it seems to be doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Nice work.
So Donnie, thanks very much. I have to say though, I think the cage is too small.
The cage is
I know.
not to spec, but it was what I had.
I understand. And I know you're trying to save money, but I think that maybe, and it might work for, but the professionals would say you need
3-foot
a
diameter, 3-foot diameter.
6 diameter, or, yeah, okay.
Time was running out. I had to break some days.
10 shopping carts.
If I had a conservation fund, then I could have bought materials. But yeah, no, I think that it needs to be. I was expecting them to be able to get closer, but I think the ice is a significant impediment for them to get to it. But that's why I've been going by frequently to see if they messed with it.
So our goal was to lower the water level to the height of the existing pipe that's already going over one of the dams. That was the goal.
But I will put out there that the water level, even if it goes down, even if it lowers by 5 inches, is still significantly higher than the control meter, which is what the 2001 DPW report set as the height at which the other structures around the marsh, such as the Carlin Road detention pond, would actually work.
So we're kind of running a risk.
So something will have to be done, either a flow-through device to lower the water level for that dam in the spring. But so I'll be calling everybody, all of you, to come out with me in March.
But you don't have to wear your sandals and shorts.
We should think about getting some waders because Downey was out there in his sandals breaking the ice and standing in the water.
I didn't think you're making a very good, I didn't think you're setting a very good example for your kids. They're gonna out there watching,
They're not going to come paddling with me if they cold water.
This doesn't have leeches like Brookwood does.
That's true.
all right. So, what about the CPC?
So the CPC, as you read in the paper, voted on the 3rd round of grants. The 2 grants that were for open space, one was for the acquisition of the conservation restriction on the Marble Brook parcel. That was approved in total. I think $118,000, 600. There was some discussion at the meeting about pursuing, Bruce, if you could fill me in the exact name of the program, it's Conservation Partnership.
Conservation Partnership Grant with the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, which will pay for about 1/3 of the project. Unfortunately, what we just found out is that they're ineligible for funding unless the Conservation Commission holds the conservation restriction. And the Nonotuck Land Fund had originally, or at least
They want DPW to hold.
they want the Department of Public Works to hold it. So our office had a meeting with 2 co-chairs on Monday or Tuesday to discuss whether or not it might be better to have the Conservation Commission hold the conservation restriction. That way they could apply for $46,000 in funds. And if they're willing or the Community Preservation Committee is willing to make that determination. Otherwise we lose out on $46,000 plus, I think.
What are the chances of actually?
I think they have a pretty good chance of getting that money. The criteria for the evaluation of the projects includes watershed land, priority habitat land, large open parcels. So basically, they qualify for all of those. They already have the local match in hand, and they're a non-city organization. So they basically meet everything. The only thing they may lose points on it is the public access. There's limited public access, and I'm not sure, but that's a small percentage of the evaluation criteria. So I think they have a pretty good chance of receiving it. They would have to agree, and the Community Preservation Committee would have to agree to, and the Conservation Commission would have to agree to accept the conservation restriction as is, I guess. So, as approved by the Community Preservation Committee. So I don't know how that's going to work. My assumption is we'll talk to them on Monday or Tuesday. There's a meeting between myself and Wayne and Joanne Montgomery and Adele Franks, and then Jack Horner, who's the chair of the CPC, and Fran Volkman, who's the vice chair. And then any of you are welcome to join. I'll send an email out as to when we meet. So if you want to continue.
And also the issue that they're a 501c3, but I thought, one of the criteria was also that the recipient organization be a 501c3. Bruce had some thought that because they were working with Valley Land Fund, actually, which is a 501c3, but it might be, transaction might be structured such that Valley Land Fund could be the applicant.
Right. So I don't think they're incorporated at this time, which means
or they're February 6th. Is the
Valley Land Fund is their parent organization, and they would qualify.
It surprises me since you can't get tax write-offs, or your donors can't get tax write-offs.
Well, I think they take their donations in as to Valley Land Fund.
That's,
Yeah.
I think
so
that's
if they're already doing that.
So if they're already doing that, they would qualify under that.
okay.
So I'll report back to you on that. I'm leaving on Wednesday, or Tuesday's my last day in the office until January 5th. Going to Sri Lanka for three weeks. So I won't be able to check my email. So I guess if you have questions, ask Wayne. And he'll be monitoring this project and all my other projects.
You won't be able to check with email, or you won't choose to check with
I won't be able to check my email
Don't make
to Sri Lanka. So I think that's it for that project.
anything else that pertains to the conservation?
The other one was the Conservation Fund, which Conservation Commission has requested $150,000 to fund hard and soft costs of land acquisition in order to have the money available when a parcel became available, because even expediting an application through the CBC still will take a matter of months. And Bruce was telling me that even some of the money from the first round of funding for the CBC is still not arrived yet. Unfortunately, that was not approved in whole. It was actually only $10,000 was given. So I think that that's something that we need to go back in the next round and make a better case for why having a significant amount of money available to make purchases is important. Again, in presenting it, they had expressed some discomfort with allowing the money to be outside of their control, wanting to have some sort of control even after appropriating it. And Wayne had said he was perfectly willing to have each project approved through them, right? So that they would know what was the secondary approval going back to them, and that was not, I think, given sufficient weight in the final discussion. So again, they're expecting the Conservation Commission to come back with an application this round and see if we can make the case again.
Thanks, Tony. enforcement order?
As far as enforcements go, we received a post-construction report from the cemetery located off of Haydenville Road. And they did a great job of restoring the wetland that was filled. And remember, our deal was that we would require a smaller request for determination if they were to allow the commission and or their representative to look for vernal pools in the spring. Their lawyer and I kind of agreed on a deal basically on that on, it was last Thursday, last Wednesday morning.
That wasn't hard.
It was difficult for them because they all, well, what they said is they also wanted to have a representative available. And I said, well, it's your land, you're welcome to have a representative available at any time. However, the representative for the Conservation Commission would be making a decision on the vernal pool based on criteria at the state level. So it's not, there's no discretion in there as to whether or not it is a vernal pool. It's strictly it is or it isn't. And so he wanted to bring that back to his client and say, there's probably no reason to hire somebody else to be there to, but they're welcome to. And so we solidified that deal, and so now we have their post-construction report. In the spring they'll do a delineation, and we'll be able to walk the land for look for vernal pools. So that's a good outcome. The Cardinal Way project that we discussed, is there a representative here from Cardinal Way? McDonald, Jennifer or Kevin McDonald. I sent, originally we sent the enforcement order.
We'll ask again, maybe they'll come.
Ask again.
Weren't they supposed to come?
They're supposed to come.
Yeah, but maybe they'll come later.
Okay,
Later
I'll ask again. So we sent an enforcement order, and it gave them, I can't remember till what date, to comply with the enforcement order to basically remove the accessory structure, to place boulders along the no disturb area, and to submit a multi-species buffer zone planting plan to the commission, and they didn't do that. So at the last meeting, you guys said give them 2 more weeks, send them another letter. I sent them a letter giving them until December 5th, and haven't received anything from them yet. What it said is if you do not, it basically says if conditions have not been met by the extended date, the commission will view your lack of action as a refusal to comply with enforcement order, and you'll be liable to a penalty of not more than $300 for each offense. Every day such violation continues shall constitute a separate offense. So on. So I still haven't heard anything. I guess I don't know how you would like to move forward. Do you want to begin?
Do we have confirmation receipt?
I don't have confirmation receipt of the second letter sent. I have confirmation that it was sent, but not signed for. It's possible that they refused the letter.
But you spoke with them.
I've spoken with them many times.
But how did
Not since the first. They didn't comply with the first date. I did call them on the date, the first date, and I said to them, you should show up at the Conservation Commission meeting. I haven't heard from you, and they decided against it. So I guess it's your decision how you want to move forward on this.
Well, so what makes you think they'll be here later?
I don't know. I just.
Well, if they saw the published agenda, they would see that the other businesses after.
Well, they would, but it doesn't say show up at the Conservation Commission meeting. It says meet these demands that we requested 90 days ago, basically, and you haven't replied to us. So I just wanted to ask to see if they were here, if they wanted to represent
And you
themselves.
did have confirmation receipt of the initial.
I did, yes. In fact, I spoke with them on the phone, and they said that they did receive it, but they prefer not to comply until spring or thereafter. So it's up to you.
But they said they would comply in the spring?
They said he said his wife was away for the week and that she would deal with it, but they prefer not to remove the structure until the spring.
we should just get them in here and get a plan in place. Should we send them $100?
Yes.
Fine.
Get their attention.
Okay. So,
We'll just show $100 fine.
You think that's gonna work?
Yes, in the past.
But in the letter, tell them when we're gonna meet.
Yeah, ask them to come to the meeting.
okay, and if they don't come to the next meeting, is there something that you would like to put in the letter? If they don't comply or come to the next meeting, I mean, the letter that we wrote said
Haven't we
that,
already said that we were gonna start the fines?
no,
So,
we did, yeah.
No, I was talking about, do you do it every day, or, I mean, you really don't want to find, you really want them to.
Oh, I understand, I just think that if we send them a letter saying that there will be $100 fine after threatening with $300 fines and continuing fines,
I agree.
I don't know how that will be any more likely to motivate them to show up.
No, you have to stick with the $300.
I mean, I don't,
Okay. Okay.
Okay,
Send them
I
that.
agree.
and how many $300 fines are you wanting to send?
I mean, when do we want to start retroactive?
No, I mean, if I send a $300 fine on Monday, and they call me on Monday saying, or Tuesday saying,
Then they have to come in with a plan.
You're leaving town.
I'm leaving, so
So should you give them my phone number?
I can give them
Should
Paul,
you give them Wayne's phone number?
I can give them whoever you like. Whoever's phone number that you would like me to give. I can
I might
give
be
you,
leaving.
already
too.
on vacation.
I can give you all of your home phone numbers, or
You leaving as well?
my number in Sri Lanka.
There you go. That'll be fun right there. Well, I'm actually gonna leave too, probably on this. Not this coming Wednesday, but next week, but you can do mine, sure.
Okay,
If they don't call, they don't call.
okay. And you want to make a motion for that?
Sure, Mason, you wanna do that?
no, none of mine.
And yours?
Remember.
Okay. A second? Any other discussion?
When's our next meeting? What's the date? Just put it in there.
It's January 8th, I believe. Let me check quickly. It's January 8th.
so this is for a single $300 fine with no continuing fines? So just the first day?
As long as they show up with a plan,
As long as they call.
demonstrating good faith effort to comply, but as a meeting in January, yeah.
Okay.
You know, we could also have them work it off beaver dams.
Alright, any other?
We have two other violations, but I
Did we
think we
vote
should
on it
discuss
later?
them after. One was a
Wait, we
meeting.
gotta vote
yeah.
for a minute here. Any other comments about this particular one on Cardinal Way? Alright, all those in favor?
I
Okay.
Okay.
Alright, so you wanna set up?
Sure.
Alright, why don't you put it over here, Kevin? It's either there or there.
Oh, we have a couple of other things too at the end.
I know.
Okay.
Oh, I know.
Certificate of compliance. And
Well, we're just, now we're on.
emergency. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that, so don't get up and leave. Yeah. Nothing else.
Lower down that price line. No, I
storm window. I don't see
It looks like a storm window.
There's something out there.
Yeah, it's gonna be a little tight in here tonight.
Okay, while they're setting up, our next issue is notice of intent filed by Tofino Associates and Northern Avenue Homes Incorporated for the construction of 25 dwelling units and associated roadways, parking areas, driveways, sidewalks, utilities, landscaping, and stormwater management system. The project is proposed to take place in the 100-foot buffer zone of Bordering Vegetated Wetlands. The project location is Northern Avenue, map ID 25C-12 and 25C-16.
Sorry. I'm gonna end up in your lap.
Just identify yourself.
My name is Doug Kohl, and I am the developer of the project. The project consists of 25 townhouse units on about 5.6 acres of land, which includes 2.2 acres of wetlands. No work is proposed in the resource area itself. As part of the sustainability plan the city has now approved, the city would like to focus additional development in those sections of town that are already densely inhabited, including URB, which is the zoning district for this project. The name typically used for these kind of developments, as you probably all know, is infill. And there are a lot of benefits to infill, such as reducing the need for new development in the outlying more rural areas of town, permitting the conservation of farmland and wildlife habitat, providing more housing near places of employment, reducing the time, money, and energy and air pollution associated with commuting and use of single occupancy automobiles, increasing the viability of public transit by increasing the number of passengers located conveniently nearby, and increasing the liveliness of downtown and the economic viability of businesses within walkable distances of infill projects. Now, the new wetlands ordinance as it exists is a good reflection of the goals expressed in the sustainability plan. The ordinance created a regulatory standard that provides greater protections in undeveloped areas away from services than in those areas that are immediately adjacent to development and services. While some may disagree with the priorities of the sustainability plan, as expressed in the wetlands ordinance, it now has the force of law, and with respect to this project, people on both sides of the issue, myself included, all need to work within it as it is currently written. Our proposed project falls within the category of infill, placing 25 housing units within easy walking distance of downtown jobs and schools. As a developer who is now looking for these kinds of sites, I can tell you they are not easy to find. The project is a buffer zone project only. There is no work proposed within the resource area itself. There is, however, a substantial amount of work being proposed in the buffer zone. All of the townhouse units are to be constructed a minimum of 35 feet from the wetlands. However, there is other work to be done in the buffer zone between 35 feet and 10 feet from the wetlands, including a portion of a smaller detention basin, most of the bioretention basin, pipes from detention basins, dry wells and associated piping for infiltration of roof drainage, grading patios, yards, and a stone retaining wall around the yard. To mitigate for the impacts within the buffer zone, we will clean up and use intensive plantings up to the no encroachment zone. One of the most important functions of the buffer zone in urban settings is to provide wildlife habitat. However, the site is currently quite degraded with trash and invasive species, which diminish its habitat value. We propose to use native woody and herbaceous plantings between the yards and the wetlands for the dual purpose of providing for wildlife and keeping people out of the wetlands and the wetland edge. We will plant native fruiting shrubs such as high bush blueberry, winterberry, and cranberry bush viburnum to provide a high-quality forage for a variety of animals. We will also include a variety of shrubs which have thorns and thickets to stop the spread of any yards towards the wetlands. We also plan a system of clear boundary markers labeled with the phrase limit of yard so that all property owners there are informed about the restriction on encroachment towards the wetlands on an ongoing basis. To give you more details on the project, I'd like to turn it over to Mike Liu, who's going to go over the plans in detail.
Thanks, Doug.
Mike Liu from Berkshire Design.
Michael Liu, Berkshire Design Group. With me also tonight is Brian Darnell, an engineer with Berkshire Design Group. We can talk a little bit more about the drainage once we get there, and if you have any specific questions about that. I suppose most of you are pretty familiar with the site. We had brought up a couple photo boards, so I'm just going to highlight those very quickly. These photos were taken just on Monday, I believe. Was it Monday, Gloria? We were at the earlier this week. And they basically show the conditions out there, sans foliage, but there are many, many invasive and unwanted species of vegetation out there. Knotweed at the end of, these are taken at the end of Northern Avenue. There's knotweed thickets developing. There's numerous vines and bittersweet climbing up into the trees, as you can see, weighing them down even. There are thickets of multiflora rose coming in, lots of black locust trees. Even in this clump to the south, there's it looks like they've been cultivated, but Norway spruces, which are I don't think they're classified as invasive, but they are a non-native tree that gets very large and produces lots of shade, prohibiting other lower growing native species from coming in. But these pictures generally give you a sense of what's going on the site. Additionally, as you come out through the right-of-way off of North Street and walk in a bit, this area right in here has been used historically as a dumping ground for yard waste from various people surrounding the site. There are a number of pieces of concrete, pipe, sewer brick, a lot of old construction debris along here, which is in some of the pictures, as well as some other building materials roughly in this area, which has been filled. There's a kind of the grade generally falls down toward the wetlands here, shown in blue.
Mike, could you step back?
Sure.
I can see that.
Sorry about that. The grade generally falls across the site in this direction. The blue signifies the edge of the bordering vegetated wetlands. This area has been filled in the past, and there are several large pieces of concrete, and we're not sure what else is in there, but that's an area where we don't want to clean up too much. Doug has been talking about picking up surface debris and trying to remove it and clean up the area even within the wetlands, which would be an improvement. But we want to not get in there and excavate, so to speak, and pull, excuse me, pull rubbish or rubble out of the embankments that are there for fear of, the erosive effects and destabilization of those artificial mounds, if you will. In this photograph, aerial photograph, are overlaying the blocks of residential units. In yellow, you can see where they're laid out. There's 6 blocks of buildings. There's a duplex proposed off of the end of Northern Avenue, and then another duplex type building at the end of View Avenue. This existing building, I believe, is proposed to be demolished and removed. There's a block of 6 units here, a block of 5 units here, another block of 6, and a block of 4 down in this area. You can see the relationship of those units to the wetland boundaries. As Doug mentioned, they are a minimum of 35 feet from the wetland, and most of them are substantially further away from the wetlands. In this rendering of the proposed site plan, you get a better sense of the proposed road and circulation system. View Avenue is here. It's an existing paved road that serves 3 different properties. It's proposed to be, I'm sorry about the scale of this the plan, but View Avenue is proposed to be extended into the parcel where the road system would loop around and come back out via this right-of-way that comes back onto North Street. There's a short dead end with a turnaround at the end to serve this block of 5 buildings, and similarly in the south there's a short dead end with a few parking spaces at the end to serve these 2 blocks of buildings. Drainage is proposed to be handled in several different ways. It's not all concentrated in one area, but we have a small detention basin here at the end of this road system, primarily catching a lot of water coming this way. There's a bio-retention rain garden type feature here, which will treat a lot of water coming off of the road system here. And then this is the largest drainage feature, a detention basin, which is going to handle the bulk of the water coming off the site here. Additionally, there's several infiltration type systems which are going to handle the clean water coming off the roofs, and we're proposing to construct those underground in the backyard spaces of the buildings, here, here, and here, and then one back here, to basically take that water and infiltrate it to the maximum extent that we can, back in the ground. That's where the water would naturally go, and then eventually reach the wetlands. I'm going to basically keep the presentation here pretty short. I'm not going to get into plantings and things like that unless we have specific questions from the commission and audience members. Also, I just wanted to point out that there's a proposal to make a connection to the bike path. There is a wetland channel that parallels the bike path over here. If it's possible to get permission from DCR to make that connection, I think that Doug would like to pursue that with the city and the planning department. It's historically been difficult to make access to the rail trail and bike system via DCR property. But I think with that, I'll just let you open it up to comments and questions.
Can I just ask you?
Yeah, what's the drainage system for the small units at the end of the...
There's nothing proposed to happen here. This is primarily, there's not that much of a change over here, and we're more than making up for the treatment and water quality and quantity. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brian. over here in the main portion of the site. So the majority of this water is clean water. There is an infiltration, we're calling it a dry well, laid out in the back lawn underground of this unit just to catch the roof water. But otherwise, the water will surface flow down toward the wetland as it does naturally.
Any questions from the commission? About the project, about the drainage?
Actually, stormwater management comes to mind. It's a rather thick report that you have to put out.
Sure, right.
And if you could briefly go over some of the highlights of your stormwater management.
I'll let Brian point those out. I just want to say we have submitted an application, stormwater management application to the city DPW, and as you might know, they're holding off on their final comments until they get some type of feedback from the commission.
So I think I talked to Doug McDonald, who's stormwater manager for the city, over the past couple of days about this project, and like Mike said, he's holding off. He did review it. He also reviewed DEP's comments. He thinks that they're pretty good comments, and that they've done a pretty thorough review, which is easier on him anyway. I guess what he's really holding off for is the actual decision of the commission. The section 33710E2 in table 1 says that this zone allows wetlands work potentially allows encroachment up to 35 feet from wetlands, but 10 feet from wetlands may be allowed at the discretion of the Conservation Commission if the applicant provides extraordinary mitigation, replication, restoration, and open space preservation measures. So Doug didn't want to make a decision on this until the actual commission makes a decision on whether or not you are all going to allow or not allow the work up to 10 feet, or 12 feet I believe is the closest, and how you're going to move forward with this. And if it is at this point, he's done the majority of his research and review, and if it isn't, he'd like to not have to revise his comments that would be on the record. So I think that's probably the first discussion the commission should have. And I don't know, Paul, if you wanted to start that, did you have anything to say?
So I just, most of what's in that buffer zone is, or what's in this area between 35 and 10 feet is stormwater detention or infiltration basins. So we have to decide if that's permissible. And I know that the applicant has written a letter and outlined some possibilities. Did you want to talk about any of those, Doug? Or do you want to just read it off the letter?
Without reading it, you're referring to the mitigation issues?
Right.
There were various things. I mean, we're all dealing with a new bylaw. The third was looking for open space possibilities elsewhere, where we would compensate with some kind of land that would be given to conservation purposes. So any and all of those are on the table. I think with respect to, well, you've got to refresh my memory here. The Microcal, I gather, is doing a wetland replication in the industrial park, there was certainly precedent there for creating a fund to make that happen. So that was one of the things that came to mind. On the site, there certainly are things that can be done to enhance that wetland. It is, you know, the runoff heading towards it is from the industrial park. So it is not the most pristine site, but there is trash there that can be removed. There are invasive species, substantial amounts of invasive species that could be removed. So those certainly were on the table as options. And there was another site you mentioned, a name of a site where something had been done in the past regarding
When I was talking to Vicky Marcus, he's actually doing a request for a certificate of compliance for the Dudinaki residence, which was permitted when I was here. And in that particular instance, we actually allowed, and Paul, you might remember this too, and Sue also, we actually allowed encroachment up to the 20-foot buffer, but then we had a very substantial shrub planting between 20 feet in the wetland. And also we had posts every 20 feet, which I guess we put birdhouses on now to make sure that that line was always maintained. And the idea behind the heavy shrub planting was that it wouldn't be encroached on, and it would also keep people out of the wetlands.
And actually, we've already put that on the table. That got incorporated into what we were already doing in the buffer zone. So that's already there in the plans, something along those lines. So the last notion was, there is some land that I do own that Wayne has an interest in that is out on Bridgeport Road in that area. And that certainly was something that we would be willing to discuss, putting that into conservation. It hasn't been discussed since that initial idea was thrown out there, but that was thrown on the table as well.
So from the commission, I thought we would just talk about your what it is you think about this, and then we open up to the public, get comments from the public. So I'm trying to get a sense of whether we should just even, I mean, are we going to allow Doug to put it to go past the 35-foot buffer? And if we are, what would we ask for? And if we're not, then we don't have to talk about it.
I want to hear, I guess, from the public before I would have anything else to say, so I
Well, you don't want to.
otherwise, you don't need us here.
First question, though, in the months that I've been on the commission, there has not been, that I can recall, a case where that reduction of 35 to 10 feet has been allowed. Has that ever been allowed prior to the time that I joined the commission?
Well,
I'm just wondering whether
it's
it was
new ordinance is new.
It's new.
It's new.
Right, I knew it was a new ordinance, but there was time
It's
between
a
the ordinance and my joining the commission. I just wondered if this has come up before. Apparently not.
The ordinance was written for this project.
So, so all right. Well, we can hear from.
Are you going to restrict public comment to this actual 10-foot, 35-foot to 10-foot reduction? Because otherwise, it seems that the commission has to get past this point
In order
prior to opening it up for all comments on stormwater, on site design. I guess not site design since that has nothing to do with wetlands. But basically, the commission can only make a determination on this project on the effects of the wetland, whether or not this would affect the resource area. So if you have a comment on the building itself or the size of the development, or if you like the detention basin but you don't like the color of the house, whatever it is, if you can make it so that it's geared toward the wetland, that's the only thing the commission has jurisdiction over, is the impact of a project on a resource area. So traffic and things like that, those are for the planning board, but this committee only has jurisdiction to make a decision on the actual resource area based on the Wetland Protection Act or the local wetlands ordinance.
So we'd have to be happy to hear from you. If you want to speak, you need to clearly state your name, because we're going to put in the minutes, and we'll just say, we'll start with 3 minutes for comments, and then if we have more time, we can go around again. Okay? Yes, sir.
My name is Alan Seawald. I'm an attorney from Amherst. I live here in town, and I'm representing the neighborhood association. I think that before you get to the 10 to 35, I think you also have to look at your ordinance and think about the 35 to 50. There's a fundamental inconsistency in the ordinance. The way I read this is that under E2B, in order to get from 50 to 35, Mr. Kohl is going to have to show that mitigation measures will improve the condition of the wetlands or adjacent upland. I know that there is a theory that and another section that conflicts with this, that absolutely waives down to 35 feet from 50 feet, which is the default no encroachment zone. But then you have this other section that requires Mr. Kohl to make a showing in order to get from 50 to 35. And then from 35 to 10 must make what's described as an extraordinary showing of, what we'll call for shorthand, extraordinary measures. So if I could direct your attention to E2B. It's not... The notice of intent that I have, and I don't have any letter that Mr. Kohl was referring to, I haven't seen that, but the notice of intent doesn't even contain this language in it. And so while there is language, as I said, language of waiver from 50 to 35, if that's the policy, then what does E2B, and maybe this is more of a question for you, what does E2B apply to? What does that showing apply to?
I've looked at this. I think it's a mistake or it's an error in drafting the ordinance. I think the two parts do seem to be inconsistent. Going to 33710B though.
Capital B.
Yeah, capital B.
That's what I've been calling capital B and
Yep.
lowercase
Yeah,
b.
no.
Yeah.
I won't say parens. 33710B hereby waives any of 33710 performance standards that are over and above state law with the exception of setback requirements in Table 1. That general statement would then lead me to believe that reading down through the rest of these performance standards, I only have to look at the Wetlands Protection Act. I understand.
Well, no,
that, I understand that there's an error here, but in terms of trying to make the best sense out of these two inconsistent provisions, I think that you would completely remove the infill or the benefits to infill development or the encouragement of infill development if you said that you can only do infill development if you in fact not just mitigate but you actually improve the condition of the wetlands.
Well,
which is.
But you're the Conservation Commission, so while I understand that infill is a land use theory that is favored, and I understand there's a balance here, but where the balance is with regard to the commission that is charged with protecting the wetland, we ought to, and there's an ambiguity, we ought to be deferring to the more protective provision, not the less protective provision. You're not the planning board, you're the Conservation Commission. You're here to protect the wetland. And unless the infill project can show that it is improving the wetland, and maybe you can show that, maybe you can't, but I think that has never been addressed in the notice of intent. And you have a significant ambiguity here, and this is the first time you're applying it. So I think that we need to take a step back and start deciding how this whole thing applies and not just jump in at the 35-foot mark. The other thing is, where, while I'm not going to stand here and suggest this is not infill, I think your ordinance has a serious problem referring to infill without a definition, so that when you get to another project, how do you know it's infill? And
well, again, I would say that, you know, my job as commissioner is to protect the wetland within the framework I'm given in the city bylaw and the State Wetlands Protection Act.
correct.
Now, as to infill development, the only definition that I can find in the city bylaw is the use of the zoning districts. I don't. Is that a perfect definition? Is that the best definition? Would I, if I was drafting this law from scratch myself, use that as the definition? I don't know. But when I read it, it says to encourage infill development. That's the purpose clause. It then goes on to say that these districts shall have different standards applied to them.
Right.
Now, the city council decided in their wisdom that those districts, development within those districts was equated to or would qualify as infill.
So if those are the only districts, how do you get infill under small b? Where does that apply? Where, in what infill project? Because what you're saying is if you apply capital B and ignore lowercase b, you have wiped lowercase b now out of the ordinance. And you've made it superfluous language, which is against all canons of statutory construction to eliminate language. You can apply both capital B and lowercase b together. And to say that what happens is there is this waiver, and that the intent was that for lowercase b to be part of Table 1, because Table 1 is not set off from anything, it's not even labeled Table 1. And so lowercase b is actually part of Table 1. So in order to get to 50 to 35, Mr. Kohl has to make the showing that's contained in lowercase b. And that, I would suggest, is the proper interpretation of this ambiguity.
I think you're right, and I think what 337 capital B says is that they're waiving these performance standards, these specified performance standards, and then lowercase b says that infill development must include mitigation measures that improve the condition of the wetland. And I think that's what the applicant has proposed, and whether or not the commission determines that that is actual an improvement or not, but I think that's where he's going with.
I disagree with you, Bruce. And the reason I disagree is because I think that Mr. Kohl was referring to was the 35 to 10 in the notice of intent. I haven't seen the letter, but what he was clearly referring to in the notice of intent was the 35 to 10, not the 50 to 35.
Right, but I also think that there were, I think you're right. In the case of his letter, he was referring the 35 to 10, but in the case of his proposal, I think he was referring to lowercase b, or maybe inadvertently, but that's what was offered prior to the discussion of the 35 to 10.
So if he's offering just to get from 50 to 35, the measures he suggested, where are the measures, the extraordinary measures from 35 to 10?
I think that's where we're going now.
I don't think we've talked about it yet.
So all of the offerings that Mr. Kohl just made and put on the table were to get him from 50 to 35.
Except in the letter that was sent that's stated from 35 to 10, these are what I would...
The way I read the notice of intent, and correct me if I'm wrong, he doesn't even refer to this paragraph. He doesn't even cite this paragraph. It's not even in the notice of intent narrative.
I don't think he has to. I think that was is within a plan that's given to us, and the commission makes a decision that says, does this improve the actual existing conditions of these wetlands, or does it not? If so, we'll start at 35, or maybe not. But the commission.
No. The question is, do you start at 50 or 35?
Right.
So if you don't find that Mr. Kohl is improving the wetland under lowercase b, he's back to 50.
I think that's part of the discussion, and I think that's what the commission basically did on their when they review this at their house. They review it and say, is there an improvement in the wetland, or is there not an improvement? And then we'll move forward from there. That's partially why stormwater measures are taken, why infiltration measures. I think you have a good point. But I think, and that's part of the discussion, but I think that was included in his proposal when they discussed putting in the infiltration basins, when they discussed putting in the additional bushes between the plantings and the.
But that's in between 35. I read that as being the 35 to 10 mitigation offerings, not the 50 to 35 mitigation.
I read that as a separate letter that we received. The separate letter addresses 3 individual
Is there a copy of the separate letter that I might have?
One is restoration, one is mitigation, and the other is the open space preservation. Those are spelled out in the 35.
Right, and those are the extraordinary measures. Those follow the extraordinary measures to get you from 35 to 10.
Right.
But and so I will take a look at this. I thank you for.
No, I think it's a good point, and it's something we definitely need to clarify when we revisit this ordinance, which was took many different routes in its process.
As most legislation does.
As most does. Yes.
Anyone else who would like to?
Adam Kohl from North Street. I'd like to read you a couple passages. First one is from a scientific paper by Castell, Wetland Buffers, Use and Effectiveness, 1992, where they write, buffers of less than 50 feet in width are generally ineffective in protecting wetlands. Buffers larger than 50 feet are necessary to protect wetlands from an influx of sediment and nutrients, protect wetlands from direct human disturbance, protect sensitive wildlife species from adverse impacts, and protect wetlands from the adverse effects of changes in the quantity of water entering the wetland. Buffer function was found to be directly related to the width of the buffer. 95% of buffers smaller than 50 feet suffered a direct human impact within the buffer, while only 35% of buffers wider than 50 feet suffered direct human impact. Overall, large buffers reduce a degree of changes in water quality, sediment load, and quantity of water entering the adjacent wetland. And then more recently, in 2008, Environmental Law Institute published a Planner's Guide to Wetland Buffers for Local Governments. And they said, in an assessment of 21 established buffers in 2 Washington counties, Cook, 1992, found that 76% of the buffers were negatively altered over time. Buffers of less than 50 feet were more susceptible to degradation by human disturbance. In fact, no buffers of 25 feet or less were functioning to reduce disturbance to the adjacent wetland. Buffers greater than 50 feet showed fewer signs of human disturbance. Enacted local government buffer ordinances show a wide range of wetland buffer dimensions. The lowest we found was 15 feet measured horizontally from the border of the wetland, the highest approximately 350 feet. Largest number of ordinances clustered around non-disturbance or minimal disturbance buffers at 50 or 100 feet. So I conclude from this that if there's a scientific basis that these wetlands will not be harmed by encroaching to within 12 feet, I'd really like to see it, because I've been researching this for 2 years and I have not seen it yet, almost 2 years. Whereas I think there's a lot of scientific evidence that this level of encroachment will harm the wetland. I don't understand how all the mitigation schemes will prevent this. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My name is Tom McCurry. I live on North Street. I want to add a little bit more to what Mr. Seawald was saying, and I think it raises the question. I was noticing on the map that's showing right here in front of us, the large detention area, for example, it's positioned right about where that stand of Norway spruce is located that you mentioned earlier. Now, I would agree with you that there are numerous invasive species in that general area. The multiflora rose you mentioned, bittersweet, a few other things, but I would say that the Norway spruce has been planted there by somebody. They obviously are not native species. They're not invasive species, however, and I contend that they provide a rich area of shelter and food, nesting sites, and in contrast to what this gentleman said, there's plenty of different species growing beneath those trees, a lot more than you'd find beneath a stand of hemlock, for example. And I want to point out one more thing. Because you're protecting the wet land, don't just focus on the wet area. Think about the animals living in the wet area. They don't all like having their feet wet constantly. Where do they go when it gets really wet? To the detention ponds? I don't think so. I think you're really encroaching much too far and you're diminishing the animals living in the wetland area by doing what you're saying. You may have the wetland nice and wet, but what about the animals you're trying to protect? That's what I want to ask.
All right, thank you. I thought I saw a hand. Yeah.
Were you going to respond to that question? Was any?
Oh, it's an open-ended question. It's basically the point being that these animals do need to be able to retreat from that area when it becomes inundated. That's my main point.
Yes, sir.
I'm Joel Dansky. I live at 29 Northern Avenue. I've been there since 1979. And I'm not. Could you repeat your name again? Sorry. Joel Dansky, D-A-N-S-K-Y. And I'm not commenting on the project as a whole. I assume there'll be other opportunities to do that. I understand the comment about the restricted confines of the decision you're about to make, but that doesn't restrict public speech, as I understand it. What I wanted to say about the 35 and 5, I don't know the ins and outs of the legal argument, but as a member of the public who followed the debate, and there was considerable debate about 50 feet, 35 feet, and so on, my sense is that 35 feet was the compromise, and extraordinary means extraordinary. And I really urge you to hold that line, because I think there are a lot of people who are very dissatisfied with 35 feet, and I'm not going to get into whether that was good or bad, but I feel like that was the public consensus of the elected body, and I feel you're under some significant obligation to as a voter, as a citizen, to hold up on that. Thank you.
All right. Yes, sir.
Alex Giesland, 164 Riverside Drive. It seems to me that the Commission in allowing development close to wetlands relies on engineered mitigation. That is that the developer can fix whatever damage he does to the existing natural system. I don't think that you can assume that in Northampton. We've been permitting on that basis for at least 30 years. Until a year ago, we really have never put in any mechanism to inspect these engineered systems, to see if they're maintained, to see if they work. It's not clear to me now that we have an effective system or that it's funded in any significant way, or that we've looked at the legal problems involved in long-term enforcement and inspection, who will be responsible over time. I have to tell you, as somebody who represented a ward that has a considerable amount of wetlands and building in those wetlands, that was the knottiest, the most difficult problems that we dealt with. That there really, once the houses are built, there's really no good solution. And I think on Winslow, on Nutting, on Elm Street, I think of a continual problem that's bedeviled people who've owned those houses. The developers are long gone. These were houses built 25, 30 years ago. I think of my friends John and Sue Norton on Winslow, who spent in excess of $8,000 last year to move water around their house. Almost everybody on the northeast side of Winslow has that problem. It's built along a series of wetlands and streams. So again, I urge you to, and I guess I'd like to repeat what Attorney Seawall said and Joel said, that you're the Conservation Commission. You are the people responsible. Nobody else is going to protect the wetlands if you don't. And I also think it's also significant that the city councilor with by far the most experience in this city, Jim Dostal, who worked for the DPW those years, who has personal experience with buildings built near and in wetlands and the problems that they've produced for the city over time, was adamantly opposed to moving it to the 10 feet, and is still adamantly opposed. And I hope that the city council will revisit this. In the meantime, it should really move very carefully into this new area. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I just want to follow up now that I've had an opportunity to see this December 3rd letter. Again, in the first paragraph, this is all about moving from 35 to 10. And so what I'm suggesting to you tonight is that you have the right to go to 50. You have the right, if you find improvement in the wetlands, to go to 35. I'm also here to suggest that this is sort of the first impression on this new ordinance. And the question is, are you going to be telling developers, sending the signal to developers, come and build your structures and your facilities within 10 feet of the wetlands? Because if you allow it here, you have to ask yourself, what projects are you not going to allow? This is an incredibly dense project, and I know that that Bruce suggested density is not the issue here, but it is the issue, because this is an overdevelopment of this site. And if we moved everything back to 50 feet or even 35 feet, you would be applying what the ordinance provides and allowing the 10-foot no encroachment in only the most extraordinary circumstances, extremely sparingly. That's what I think the intent of the ordinance is. Extremely sparingly do we allow encroachment to the 10-foot line or even anywhere near the 10-foot line for the reasons that Adam Cohen said with regard to the studies. So that's my suggestion to you. If you are going to allow this project to go to 10 or 12 feet, you might as well hang the banner up over Main Street that our wetlands are open for construction of stormwater facilities and all other facilities. And I do believe that notwithstanding what Mike Lou said, there is a small part of roadway that encroaches over the 30-foot line that I saw. Maybe it's just that my plan is very small, but I think there is an area of roadway that's in the 35-foot, within the 35-foot buffer. So, and I'm not here to, I mean, I don't think if everything else was outside the no encroachment line and that's all we were talking about, that's the kind of thing that would go inside the 35-foot line, not all the rest of the stuff, all the grading and retaining walls and all the rest of it that's in the up to 12 feet. And Mr. Chair, may I give you back your, unless you don't need this left. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Page.
Let's face it.
Be sure you
This land,
say your name.
okay, Paige Bridgens, P-A-I-G-E, Bridgens, I live at 12 Northern Avenue. We need to face the fact that this land that Doug is proposing to build on is sodden much of the year. This is land that has a high water table. We on the south side of Northern Avenue know about this. We live with this in our basements.
North side? Yeah.
The north side too, right here.
North Street.
And North Street, North Street too. And actually I've heard that 8 View Avenue has water up to the, now, in his basement. This site is not appropriate for building. And we need to acknowledge that and move on. This summer, there were a couple of days in June in which we had temperatures of 98 degrees downtown. I took a thermometer downtown and registered 98 degrees and then biked to the wetland. It was a 13-degree difference. It was 85 degrees at the base of the oak tree. What are the implications of that for downtown, for King Street, for mitigating the urban heat island effect? This wetland is critically important, not just for this neighborhood, but for our town. This is a woodland between downtown and the industrial park, between King Street and North Street. It is a buffer that is critically important to the well-being of this town. We charge you with the role of protecting that. And I expect for you to not be intimidated by a pet developer and his finger-wagging attorney. We've seen this in this room when Doug and Suzanne Kohl sat here and drafted the language to the wetland ordinance that would benefit him in this project. This is serious.
Okay, thanks.
Okay?
Alright.
Hi, Lisa Maloney. I'm at 170 North Street. I just wanted to make a comment and piggyback off with Tom, just because you can't be everywhere, and I just wanted to let you know, I've lived there probably like 27 years, and as far as wildlife is concerned, we have deer and fawns and bear, rabbit. These are what I have seen. I've had an owl on my front porch. So there is, and I do know that strip, and then even going through Industrial Park, is a wildlife habitat. So, but I just wanted to give you the sense of the animals that I have seen personally, and I've also have water in my basement every spring, so I'm a little concerned about, the runoff and how that's all going to work. Thank you for your time.
Yes, sir.
My name is Paul Martis, and I own a house at 180 North Street in Northampton. And I just want to reiterate things that some of my neighbors have said, is that I've owned that house since 1978, and I'm certain that every single year that I can remember, and not just in the wintertime or in the springtime, but in the summertime with a heavy rainstorm, I've had water in the cellar of my house in North Street year after year after year. And again, I'm not just talking about spring thaw, I'm talking about in the winter during rainstorms, and this is not from gutter overflow or this is just from water table rising from the floor, not coming down the walls. This is from the water table rising below the foundation of my house. And it's happened for years and years, ever since I've owned the house in 1978.
Okay. All right, thank you. Yes, ma'am. Right next to you. Or sir. Sorry.
I just want to reiterate his comment. I live at 15 Gerald Archambault. I live at 150 North Street, across the cemetery. And I have water in my cellar every year. And my next door neighbor, 142, they have water which they pump out of their cellar, which falls onto my land, which is not their fault because mine is lower. However, there's water there and there. Who else has water next to me? I don't know. But we do have water, and that's on North Street.
Okay. Yes.
Rhonda Mariani, 24 Coles Meadow. And I just want to reiterate a little bit about the feeling of your job to protect the wetlands. We went through a lot of fighting on Coles Meadow, and it seemed like when you were wetlands, you were safe. But lately, over the last 10 years, it feels like here, somebody will just give you an acre or 3 acres, and all of a sudden, people can build on it. So it might not be, but that's the way it feels like over there.
Any comments about, specifically about the project and the closeness of the property? Yes, sir.
Stephen Hathaway, 32 Northern Avenue. I've got two things. One is we also have wet basements every year again. And, I think the importance of that, it hasn't really been spoken to here, is that this is going to reduce the absorptive. I understand they're making significant measures to counteract that, but there's going to be less absorption of water by this area of land there. And it's our firm belief, I believe everybody that's stood up and said so in this room, that that's to make that situation worse. Not to mention the adverse likelihood of water coming up through the slabs that these are presumably getting put on, damage to these houses, questions about how appealing that kind of construction will be. The other thing I wanted to say was to echo Attorney Seawald's and Tom's statement that I encourage the Commission strongly to pay attention to the conservation part. It feels to me like we're here having to defend going from 35 to 50, whereas the wording in the ordinance here to me is very clearly 50 is the norm, and it has to be proven that there's a really good reason to go less than that, even down to 35, let alone 10. From looking at the plans here, there's going to be significant disruption right up to that 10-foot barrier. Not barrier, 10-foot line. And that it's great that he's proposing to make significant mitigation outside of that line and to hopefully improve things inside, but if you pave over right up to a line, it does have impact. It does have impact on the other side of that line. I realize he's not doing that, but making that disruption does affect things within the barrier, and I encourage you strongly to push that line out.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Jen D. Ryder. I'm from the North Street Neighborhood Association, and I just wanted to make a quick comment about infill as it relates to the mandate of the Conservation Commission. The main reason behind the city's support of infill is the environment. It's global warming, it's the desire to reduce car traffic, and so forth. But with a project like this, before we just cherry pick the aspects of infill that the project actually matches, namely development close to downtown, we have to look at the overall goal of infill, which is to improve the environment. And that is the goal of this commission. This commission has that unique role in the city to look out for the environmental impact of projects. And as Paige pointed out, by taking down this last stand of urban forest within this downtown residential area, is there really going to be a net benefit to the environment, to global warming reduction? And I would say absolutely the opposite, and that's something we really need to consider when we're evaluating this project. And I'd also second Alex's comment that we have to look at the long-term future of these mitigation strategies. If these properties are not selling, or if they deteriorate because of flooding, then we're just going to have another sort of soggy slum on our hands 10, 20 years down the line. Who is going to maintain these detention ponds? A wetland is self-sustaining. These things are not. They need continued investment in order to function at the level at which Mr. Kohl will have them function when they're brand new. But 10, 20 years from now, if we can't sustain these projects, then it's not going to be a self-replenishing wetland. It's going to be just a mosquito basin. So please look down to the future and don't just consider what they'll function like when they're brand new. Think about whether these projects really have the economic viability to replace a wetland in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Ruthie Woodring, 8 High Street, Lawrence, but I frequent Northern Ave. And when I think about the 50 feet or the 35 feet issue, the whole issue of encroachment, regardless of the wetlands, how the wetlands are doing, it's also like an aesthetic issue. And for people who live in town and work in town, and this is really where we live, we don't drive down Route 66 or go to the hill towns or see those woods or mountains or trees. And every bit of encroachment in town is really important. I mean, because that's all we have in terms of the woods and how we get our sanity.
Adam.
I want to speak about a specific factor on this parcel, which to my mind augurs for, having a normal 50-foot buffer zone. Last summer 2000, wetlands delineator Alec McLeod delineated the wetland along with Chuck Douchy, who's a close person, and he wrote,
This land is particularly difficult to delineate as the differences between areas meeting the technical definitions of hydrophilic plant communities and hydric soils are very slight over much of the site. So the reality is the actual wetlands boundary is considerably more blurry than is shown on these charts. So it seems to me to allow for a margin of error, and if the wetland grows or shrinks, that to come right up to 12 feet of it is very aggressive, especially for this particular parcel. And then a more global factor is, Gazette reported, this was about a year ago, extreme downpours and snowstorms are rising in frequency nationally, the highest increases in New England. Massachusetts saw a 67% rise in severe storms from 1948 to 2006, trailing only Rhode Island and New Hampshire. Top 10 severe storms in the state all occurred in the past decade. So that's another reason why we should be maintaining more like 50-foot wetlands buffer zones and certainly not chipping away at them. We need them more than ever. A new comment?
I have a question. This is regarding compensatory storage. You know, like the soil that Steve mentioned as holding water. I would like to know how much soil would be displaced in the building of these roads, driveways, parking lots, buildings. How deep, how much cubic, I'm looking, I guess, for cubic yards, I'm looking for acres paved. How many acres would be hardscaped, for starters?
I don't want to, let's not get into that. I don't want to sidetrack the discussion on
Okay, here's, maybe I could just get to the point though, and that is that that soil that is there currently holds water. I mean, some of it holds water, some of it doesn't, because it is, there's more water than there is soil. If that soil were to be removed,
it would hold more water, right? It would be a lake, it would even hold more water, it would be less. Yeah. But anyway, I'd say maybe a quick comment on it. We're aware that you don't want to be digging deep into the water table here. We certainly made sure that the site is, as a general rule, above existing grade slightly. Not in every spot, but in almost all spots.
Walter, can you just respond a little? Is it okay? Can I ask something? Can you just respond in a little bit to what people are saying about all the flooding of the basements?
Sure.
Yeah.
The water for this site goes in the other direction. And the water from this site, there are no basements planned at present for the site. We're aware that there is a water table issue in the neighborhood as a whole. I own a house on the site that's going to be demolished. It hasn't flooded in the basement, but there is some dampness down there. And certainly from our exploratory test pits looking at the water table, we agree that the water table on the site is, generally speaking, on the high side. Whether that means, a foot or two down, or 4 feet down. In some cases more than that. There are some dry parts that the site, it varies. But it's generally, tight soils. And what that means to some degree is that you've got less change from the pre-existing condition to the post-construction condition, because the soils didn't take that much moisture in anyway in terms of absorption. What it also means is that the absorption that we're doing on site, we're putting in very shallow trenches close to the surface in those areas where we know we have areas where we can infiltrate and the water table is always below the level that we're putting the infiltration in.
it is important to remember though that Gloria did write during her time as commissioner about this particular piece of land and its importance in mitigating floods. It is important to the city. Thank you, Gloria.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Shelley Fenton and I live at 164 North Street. My husband's grandparents built the house. I've lived there for over 40 years. I have a lot of water in the cellar, even though I have 3 drains in the cellar floor. been down in your property and been up to my ankles in water. Agnes Moriarty told me when we had a lot of rain, she has sometimes had to have, she can't get into her cellar because she couldn't go down there to wash. She had to move them upstairs because she would have water up to the bottom step in that house. And I've had water in my cellar even with the rains. Everything that's stored in my cellar is on raised pallets. So it's very, very wet.
Yeah, I've only had the house for a year, so I can only speak for a year. It hasn't been a problem during that year.
There is a lot of water in that cellar.
In that particular house.
Okay, thank you. What's that?
I'm just wondering if you're going to move forward with this discussion with the commission. Are you guys with the...
Is there anyone who hasn't spoken who would like to speak?
Somewhere over there.
Oh, here. Marie.
I apologize, I think we have some letters from people who were not able to attend, and I'd just like, as a matter of record, to make sure that Bruce reads a letter from Lombard.
Yes, I have that. I was planning on doing that.
Oh, great.
And I guess that's not up to me, that's up to Paul to determine whether he wants to read it or paraphrase.
Okay. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. You want to hear all this? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I wrote a letter, Gloria Parker. I live on Orchard Street, but I wrote different stuff, the flooding and the traffic, so, and that's in my letter. But I've lived on Orchard Street for 50 years, and I've been through that land a lot of times with my children, and it's always, they come home with mud up to their knees and their clothes soaking wet, and the animals that they've talked about, and the animals are still down there. So it's such a beautiful place to ruin it, you know? So.
All right, thank you. Okay. All right, I'll read some. I may not read every word, but I'll read some of them. This one's from Lily Lombard. And she says, I write to the Conservation Commission not as an abutter, but with a direct interest in limiting the scope of the development project before you, but as a citizen of Northampton who shares the common resources that your commission protect, our water, air, and our public safety. Those who appreciate the public value of wetlands and their intimidable ability to absorb and clean our water and air were very conflicted about the wetlands ordinance passed in 2007. It was particularly difficult to witness during the deliberations. Doug Kohl offered a special seat at the drafting table. As you know, one of the most contentious aspects of the ordinance was the 10-foot no-build line in urban residential zones of the city. Reassurances were issued from the Commission, the OPD, and from City Council that the Conservation Commission still had jurisdiction over a full 100-foot surrounding the wetlands and would exercise its best judgment to protect the public good. Today, those proclamations are put to the test. The reasons to restrict or to strictly protect the wetlands buffer on this parcel, and she's referring to the Environmental Law Institute's Planner Guide. I think you heard Adam talk about that. And then from Hyla Report, citizens presented in 2007, buffers of less than 50 feet in width are generally ineffective in protecting wetlands. The public risk of allowing the maximum encroachment requested are great given the housing density and location of this project. Northampton's history demonstrates the best drawn mitigation plans fail, and when they do, innocent homeowners and taxpayers shoulder the cost. So So a fundamental challenge we face as a community is to protect our common resources, sometimes at the expense of private property. Post-war development in America is a tale of private development prioritized over the common good. It's a classic tragedy of the commons. I urge you to hold firm on your role as protectors of our public good. And then we have a letter from Dane Kavanaugh, I think. Donna Kavanaugh. As a resident of North Street for over 35 years, I oppose the building of condominiums in the area. My neighbors and I have always had water problems in our basement. I feel, as many of my neighbors do, that building more construction will increase our water problem and will put a financial hardship on us. I hope you will consider the negative effects it will have on single-family residents who not build in this area. Thank you for your considerations. That's a letter I just read from Lily Lombard. Elizabeth Walden. Okay, so she writes, please accept this letter as my comments of the above referenced project. I have lived my entire 90 years within the city of Northampton. I've lived in my home at 176 North Street since purchasing it with my husband in 1961. And she's also lived around North Street and South Street and Bates Street. As you will note from Mr. Kohl's proposal, he claims the right to take my front, side, and back lawn. Okay, and my shared driveway. We'll get to that later. That has to do with land claims. Okay. Ever since I was a girl, it was common knowledge, in fact, that the entire parcel of land was a wetland. Flooding and rain and snowstorms, it was always wet with a small stream by the railroad tracks. It was a wetland woods when growing up in the neighborhood since the 1920s, and to my knowledge, it has been one going back to the 1800s. Many locals refer to it as a swamp at the time. I have a sump pump in my cellar which runs frequently and during storms, more or less continuously for days. In fact, when it broke several years ago, within 24 hours, I had 8 to 10 inches of water in my basement. My backyard also is often under several inches of water. I believe that it was in the early 1980s that the city began to dump construction materials and fill on the land beginning right behind my backyard. I understand they had permission to do so from Mr. Matusik, who owned the parcel at the time, and which was prior to the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act being enacted. It was also common knowledge to the neighborhood that Mr. Matusik dumped materials in the same area and occasionally allowed others to do so. I do not know what they were comprised of. But rumors were that he was engaged in paving and asphalt and it contained oil products. I am very concerned that the project will create further water problems for my property by creating extensive paved areas and less areas for water to be absorbed and contained in rain and snowstorms. I am also concerned that some of these paved areas and homes will be built up to 12 feet away from the wetlands themselves, as I understand it. I do not see how the salt runoff and buildings so close cannot harm already disturbed land. Okay. I am also concerned that whatever materials were dumped in the construction, a allowable portion of the parcel may be disturbed, and she doesn't think that it should be. I urge the Commission to recognize the environmental nature and history of the area and the important role it plays in helping to keep the North Street area less likely to have flooding and water issues, being an intact wetland that can still absorb water from the wooded fill area as well. I also urge you not to allow any buildings closer than 100 feet of any of the wetland as I understand the statute creates, or at the very least not less than 50 feet, as it seems like common sense. I also urge you not to allow such extensive pavement, which will have significant impact for where water goes. I understand the plan calls for water retention areas, but I do not believe them to be better than the ground absorbing the water rather than running into neighbors' properties, or artificial basins that may or may not work the same way. Thank you for your consideration. Dennis Helmus. He writes, please accept my letter as comments for the above referenced project. I've lived at 174 North Street since approximately 1995. I am familiar with the property under review. During the entire time of my residence on North Street, I have known the parcel to be a wetland woodland. I've seen bear, deer, fox, rabbit, hawks, other wildlife, and one year there was a moose in my backyard. The parcel floods or is very wet in rain and snowstorms, and a small stream exists by the bike path. Our residence has a sump pump in the cellar which runs frequently and during storms more or less continuously for days. In fact, when it failed several years ago, there was 8 to 10. That's interesting. I am very concerned that the project will create further water problems for the property I reside on, as well as the proposed project wetlands and abutting properties. The proposal creates extensive impervious surfaces which dramatically alter woodland and wetland, raising the likelihood of water runoff issues arising in terms of flooding. As a strong supporter of the Wetlands Protection Act and keeping a reasonable buffer between wetlands and buildings, I find the proposal, which includes building up to 12 feet away from the wetland, not warranted. I'm reminded of President Bush's recent change in regulations. You can read it if you wish. Although some individual parcels may indicate a buffer zone less than that presumed, I do not believe this parcel is one of those, given that most of the parcel is comprised of wetlands, and building anywhere less than that standard would cause encroachment issues over time. I am also concerned that whatever materials were dumped in the construction, allowable portion of the land may be disturbed and cause potentially toxic or other waste issues which may affect budding properties as well as the proposed project's units. Mr. Kohl, when first announcing the project at the Bridge Street School, stated that units would not have basements because they were undesirable. I know of no one who concurs with that opinion and can only assume that it's because any basement would be subject to water intrusion issues, which we've already heard from. I urge the Commission to recognize and support the intact woodland wetland as serving an environmental purpose for wetlands, wildlife, and the important role it plays in helping keep the North Avenue area less likely to have flooding and water issues. I also urge you not to allow any buildings closer to 100 feet or encroachment, or at the very least, not less than 35 to 50 feet. I understand the current model of so-called infill and smart growth, which the city is advocating, and which I am by and large a supporter of, as being applied to this parcel necessary to the master plan and sustainability plan. I do think any reasonable, knowledgeable, and informed person would conclude that this parcel and proposed project is an appropriate application of those principles, and this core city wetland serves an important necessary function which deserves the maximum enforcement under the Act and city's ordinances regarding protection. And then there's one short paragraph about currently the land court is regarding access points. So we will thank you for your consideration, Dennis Holmes. All right, 2 more. Mary Laskowski. Laskowski.
Lastowski.
Lastowski. Okay. I live in Ward 3. I have lived in Ward 3 since July 13th, 1949. We bought our home in 1963. We bought it from my in-laws' estate. I've always paid my taxes. My husband passed away in 1988. We raised 3 children and helped raise 3 grandsons. After all these years, I cannot see condos in our peaceful neighborhood. What is that man thinking of? We are not aware of what he's after. I understand that he bought property off North Street on Northern Avenue, but he does not occupy the home. Let's take a look at the bigger picture now. What if he plans to take over and build more? There's a brook on one of the owner's property. The land is in wetlands. How is he going to make the wetlands livable for humans? Many homeowners get water in their cellars. I'm lucky. I very seldom have that problem since we have a pump in the cellar. Where's the brook water going to go? Ask him. We have a nice school on Bates Street. Did he stop and think of the kids? Don't they deserve a quiet environment? Let the man who wants to build here put the condos in his backyard. I bet he would not let it happen. We in the North Street area and the surrounding streets say, no, 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 no.
That's my mom.
Your mom.
She would have brought her something in her arthritis and kicked it in her back, so she could have lost.
So I think this is from Gloria Parker. 40 Orchard Street.
Right here.
That's yours. Oh, okay.
I told you I wrote a lot of other stuff in there that.
Right. So can we assume that you have spoken to this letter, and we'll just
Well,
put
you could
this
probably read the first part.
first
Because
part?
I don't know if I.
I have lived on Orchard over 50 years, my children used to play in the area proposed for condos. There was wild blueberries, many animals. They would come home with their clothes wet and mud up to their knees. They called it Valley Woods. Don't know where they came up with that name. So, and then we have about your neighbor, Moriarty. This is Moriarty. Moriarty.
What does she
She
say
lives
about
on View Avenue, the house that he lives in.
That's 8 View.
And some of the property back was very protective of the property back in the woods. She loved that area. She called me one day, apologetic because she took a hatchet away from my son. He later told me that it was not his. In back of some of the houses on North Street, there are tall ferns, and they have lived in water. People I have talked to have seen bear, deer, foxes, all kinds of birds. We also saw a deer on Orchard Street.
That's right, the ostrich fern gets it up to 5 feet high. They're awesome.
Okay, and then there's a bit about traffic.
That's another organization.
Okay. Thank you for listening to neighbors at North Street area. Okay, very good. Okay, so we'll just keep these, put in with the minutes. All right.
Paul? Can I make a short comment that does pertain to this parcel?
A short comment, yep.
One part of the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan of 2004, which Gloria was the project manager on, talks about historically filled wetlands, commonly related to problems with wet basements, flooding, shifting foundations, and failed septic systems. Development in historically filled wetlands should be discouraged through zoning in order to protect health and safety. So I don't know if it's exactly the purview of CONSCOM or Planning Board, but at some point it will be addressed exactly, are there, something that qualifies as historically filled wetlands in this parcel? Our structure is supposed to go on that, and is that a smart thing to allow?
So this is in reference to the other two, the units 1 and 2.
I mean, I don't know if they've provided a chart of actually delineating where the fill is. I think that would be very interesting to learn that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
I'll go for 5 more minutes, and then we're going to close the public.
I just want to know what happens when the retention ponds fill up.
They spill over into the wetland.
There's an outlet on each retention pond.
There's a what?
So there's an outlet, so it's meant to be a controlled release of water.
Okay.
They're not supposed to fill up. They get to a certain point, some water goes out. If they go up higher, more water goes out.
And where does that water go?
The wetlands.
And then ultimately to the stream?
Yes.
So what about the stream? Would it then become a perennial stream again? And how would that impact the houses downstream from the stream? Downstream from the
What I can
proposed
tell you
condos?
is that peak flows.
Speak to the board, please.
Now I'm getting into engineering and I'm over my pay grade, so I'm going to let Brian speak to that issue.
Actually, if I can say something, everything's sized for the 100-year storm, so you'd have to have much greater than a 100-year storm to see anything overflow. And at that point, it wouldn't really turn a stream perennial. It would just add more water for a short period of time.
So, go ahead if you want.
Yeah, essentially what Doug said though, everything is sized to accommodate certain storms and actually improve the runoff rates versus what they were in existing conditions, because it is a controlled flow. And the basins never tip over unless, like Gloria said, it reaches a 100-year storm. In that case, it would be close. The peak rates would actually be fairly close to, because of all the infiltration on site as well, which was not included in any runoff calculations. So it was actually very conservative comparison between proposed and existing conditions.
Okay, I think we've got a good sense of where the general public stands on this issue.
Paul, I just have one question, do you mind?
No, I don't have. That's what we're here for.
I'm just wondering if test pits, I see a couple of test pits of the site, were test pits taken at the infiltration areas?
Well, there's actually 6 different infiltration systems on site, and the biggest one up at the north part of the site has one test pit directly in it. The others have adjacent test pits, and if the commission requires, we can absolutely perform more to show that the water table is consistent throughout.
Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the symbols came out kind of light on the print, but I think there's two different symbols indicating test pits that were done on different dates. So they might be, one is a square box, and one is a smaller round circle. There's quite a...
In the drainage report, there's a clearer picture of where the test pits are located in both existing and proposed conditions.
Okay. Are there any other questions for the from the commission?
I just wanted to know the section of the ordinance, now that I have a copy in front of me, that we were discussing with Attorney Seawall. What section is that?
337-10.
-10. That's for both of okay.
One is capital B. Capital B. One is capital E. 2. Lowercase b.
Both in section.
337-10 performance standards. B. Capital B is the first one.
Here's E.
See, I think this is the wrong.
No. See, you're letting E. I mean,
Okay,
just
got
put
it.
the,
Yep.
there's E. Go down to B2.
Okay. Got it.
Okay, so we have to decide the distance issue. And you want me to start?
Sure.
I don't see that there should be a reason to move past the 35-foot line that's in this. So that's what I say. I just don't see that as being important. So that's where I stand.
I don't see extraordinary measures that would allow us to go beyond.
Yeah. So.
When you say you don't see extraordinary measures.
The bylaw is written that it has to be really extraordinary measures to go beyond 35. I can't mitigate that. I can't see.
So what would be ordinary mitigation? Trying to follow some logic. Ordinary mitigation, I assume, would be mitigating the effects of the construction itself?
I mean, I don't
be
have
anything.
4 hours. Can I speak at this point? I assume that things like low-impact development strategy, infiltration, rain gardens, those are more standard mitigation measures. When we talk about extraordinary mitigation measures, we were looking at work that went beyond those things that you see in a well-designed project. I didn't, at this point, I'm not sure where to go with that. I think that's why you're not looking at something very specific in front of you. I assume that this would take a discussion to get to the point where we would know what to do that would constitute an extraordinary measure. If none of the things that we have mentioned thus far constitute an extraordinary measure, even as proposals of what we might discuss, then, you know, I guess at a certain point you begin to ask, why was the bylaw written this way? There have to be some extraordinary measures that can be taken in some way that meet the bylaw in your mind. I realize that this is, you know, to some degree it puts the commission on the spot. And unfortunately, I'm not the easiest project in the world. But I'm looking for a way to get to you know, a point where work within the 35 to 10 foot zone would be acceptable. And I'm very willing to look at things from land donations, to work on the site, to work in the area that replaces wetlands or things of that sort that would lead to such a determination. But I'm not sure what exactly would be the priority of the commission. what is the most important thing for you?
Can I ask something? So I'm just wondering, for example, would there be any kind of mitigation?
I don't know, that's the question, I think it's something us all, is what would that look like?
What would it look like?
I have no clue, but
I would say the resident.
going from 50 to 35, I think he's, building that in, but to go to 10 to 12, I don't know.
Well, one thing I would say is it's hard to do anything on this site without at least running your drainage into from 35 to 10. Running the pipe that's the outlet for something, whether you put the detention basin in or not. You're pretty stuck with running something that goes down towards the wetlands, which I think you'll find in your typical house anywhere that's near a wetland. You end up with a pipe that goes down towards the wetlands to get rid of basement drainage. The same kind of thing applies here, but we're going well beyond that. Clearly, that's not the issue that's on the table primarily. And with respect to Attorney Seawald, he's right that there is about 5 feet into one roadway near the rain garden that is in fact within 35 feet of the wetlands. So I stand corrected on that issue. We could continue and come back to the next meeting with a concrete proposal that would involve a series of mitigation measures, and presumably that would relieve the commission of any affirmative responsibility to come up with them. I didn't think you had that. I simply was looking for the discussion of what's on the list. It's a tough site to do that much on site because you can't create more wetlands somewhere, although we're not really dealing with the amount of wetland issue per se, we're dealing with the buffer zone issue.
Yeah, Mason.
Doing something on land somewhere else is going to help the situation here.
Thank you, yes.
So I don't see where that's an option. I have trouble getting past the 35 feet myself.
Can I just speak conceptually about that? I mean, just put it into a focus, because that's the nature of this being a sparingly granted waiver down to 10 feet, because ordinarily there aren't going to be extraordinary measures that can be taken on the site, and that's why I argue that it's an extraordinary situation that this was filed.
I'm also not inclined to go below 35 feet. I also wonder why those who've spoken so quickly got to 50, since the State Wetland Protection Act and the city ordinance both protect to 100. So I think you're being rather unambitious and arguing from 50 to 35. I do think that Doug has at least satisfied the requirement that within the upland area or the wetland to improve it anyway to get from 50 to 35 here. But again, I have to agree with Mason that even before I was on the commission, watching the commission try to put together good off-site proposals, and then that puts the position, or the commission in the position of having to weigh this distant wetland against this wetland. Again, I'm also, as Alex said, a little bit skeptical of the engineered solutions. I know that state of the art is state of the art, and I expect that you would do no less. But that part of the reason why buffer zones have received greater emphasis in wetlands protection is that they do seem to work without anyone having to maintain them in terms of making the whole wetland system work effectively. However, in terms of extraordinary mitigation, I think that to leave open what could happen within 35 feet, I think that depending on the size of the size or the impact within the 35-foot boundary, then the extraordinariness of the mitigation would be in relation to that. Obviously, here you have creation of some of these detention ponds within the 35-foot area. If you were talking about pipes or dry wells within the 35 feet, and there was some significant or extraordinary mitigation in relation to that minor incursion, that's a different
a different calculus.
Different standard.
Okay, just that obviously, the extraordinariness of the mitigation is to be balanced against the size of the incursion. I would think that's the only way that the commission could look at it. They couldn't just say, there's one extraordinary measure that you must go through, regardless of what you do within 35 feet. So.
You know, it also, there doesn't have to be in my mind, there doesn't have to be once you're past the 35-foot boundary, there doesn't have to be a set boundary over the whole project. You know, you don't have to draw the line at the same distance everywhere. So there could be, you know, things could move in one section, especially if there was a high erosion spot, maybe you'd keep more that way. But then if there was a less of a possibility of erosion, you could encroach more. Do you see what I'm saying? Or
because the impact would be less.
Because in the theory that would be it. So it doesn't have to be a set line. I know that you know across. At least that's in my view.
Paul, can I add to that?
Yes.
I think you're right, but in this case, I think if it in anywhere on the site it goes beyond 35 feet,
well,
it still must meet those.
I agree.
Those
I'm just saying
mitigation
in
measures.
between.
In between 35 and 100.
I think you're saying the mitigation needs to be proportional to the impact within the zone in question.
Yes.
Rather than saying the same mitigation applies to doing an acre worth of work in that zone versus 3,000 feet within that zone. Or
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. It's just, but it has to be noted that in order to meet the standards of the ordinance, it still would have to meet some sort of extraordinary measure within on the site anyway, or somewhere.
So we can either reject this proposal outright, or we can just continue it and ask the applicant to come back. Then he doesn't have to pay all the fees. You guys.
My thought is come back and to actually make sure the public has a chance to comment after that's on the table as well, because I don't think it would be fair for me to come back with a proposal that was altered substantially without additional comment from the public. I mean, I know that usually when you close a hearing, it leads to a vote. I'm wondering if there is a way to allow that without allow it to reopen the.
You could continue the meeting without closing.
Okay.
Yeah, and then that would allow, although the commission would need to decide whether or not it was going to be advertised in the legal Gazette, in the legal ads, or just through the other measures through the city's website, the city calendar, the city clerk, and various listservs.
It wouldn't be advertised in legal.
It would only, if it's continued, it wouldn't be legal, it wouldn't be posted in the legal ad because we only charge a one-time fee.
But normally when you continue at a meeting, it's to a time and date certain.
That's correct.
So that you don't have to read it.
Right. I'm just putting that out there so everyone understands that it would be posted everywhere else except for the legal ad, unless the commission were to decide to repost it.
Okay. So, we have to make a decision here. I mean, everybody's kind of weighed in. Kevin, did you want to say anything? No. Leslie, did you want to say anything?
No.
Okay. We should at least let them know. And I guess I'm getting the feeling that we don't want to see anything beyond 35 feet.
Right. So, let's.
Haven't voted on, but.
No, I know. But we can just, Bruce, we don't have to vote on that per se.
I don't think so, but
we just want to vote to continue, right?
If you're going to continue, you can't vote on something, because if you were to come back with a project that was 10 times the size at 35 feet, you would be basically forced to vote on that.
But I think the general consensus of the commission, at least the feeling I'm getting, is that we wouldn't want to see anything beyond 35 feet.
Again, I heard two different things. I heard some discussion of certain kinds of things, but not others. And I do want to point to that 5 feet of road. you want, well, you could go it out. Pull it out.
Okay,
5 feet.
let me restate it then.
Actually, I
There's
don't
a
want,
tiny
I don't even
little-
know where that is.
Yeah,
Actually, I don't even.
Right next to the rain garden,
I have it right here.
the road curves
Yeah.
there.
Look at-
Frankly, it's the
look
best
at the-
alignment, but it's not,
Look at Bruce's
Look at my
diagram.
it's
plan.
not life and death.
Green.
Green.
Not life and death.
In my opinion, I don't wanna see anything go beyond 35 feet. I don't know.
Well, I have the same opinion, and so does Downey, and so
Well,
does Sue.
I mentioned that just because I thought that you couldn't, or you shouldn't read, just as, Attorney Sewell was saying you should, it's against statutory construction to read things as a nullity. You wouldn't wanna say there's an absolute bar at 35 feet. I mean, and that would be saying that there's nothing that could ever qualify as extraordinary mitigation, replication, restoration, or open space. That's why I brought up saying, if there was a sidewalk, or it was, that was gonna be within 35 feet, I wouldn't wanna say to the applicant, no.
What about the infiltration that was discussed?
Well, I brought that up
Yeah.
as an example, but again, I'm saying because those infiltration trenches are a significantly smaller footprint in terms of construction and manipulation of the site than would be the detention ponds. Okay, that's why I brought it. Because they're smaller, not because that would be something that I would think the commission would approve. But
All right, so should we have a vote to continue? All right.
To January
Yes.
at
You wanna do 6 o'clock again?
Or
Or
do you
can
want
we
a
do
different day?
6:15, because there are 2 projects that we have already that have come in.
When
All right, as long
planning
as we have
board
no-
done?
What time, yeah, what time is it? Do you know what time the planning board is? No, the 22nd.
Or the 22nd, it's not clear on when the planning board hearing
Well,
is
there's
gonna be,
no
either the 8th or
point in
22nd.
putting something in front of the planning board until we know at least the general sense of direction.
Well, you can pick the date, I don't really care.
I think the 8th is the right date.
The 8th is the right date, yeah.
So what time did you say, 6:15?
Does 6:15 work for everybody? I think we have a handful of, or at least 2 projects that came in that will already be on the agenda, so.
Okay. Second, all those in favor? Aye. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming.